Hi, good evening, everyone. This is Iyad Murtada, and I would like to thank you very much for joining us for this webinar. This webinar is going to be presented by Mr. Brad Boyson. He's the Executive Director for SHRM MENA. Thank you, Mr. Brad, for conducting this webinar. This is the third part of a series of 3 webinars related to the performance standards. So just we can start. Why performance standards is important?
Well, performance management is one of the pillars of HR. It is absolutely a core of what human resources do in organizations. And what's really exciting about this standard is that it is the most comprehensive standard released to date in the United States. And this will have global implications for sure.
That's great. So I'm going to leave you with Mr. Brad so he can guide you over this part of the presentation.
Okay. Thank you again, Iyad. And hello to everyone online, and it's my pleasure to present this webinar to you. As we've mentioned before, this is one of 3 webinars that we're doing. This is the final webinar of the series of 3. It is a standard walkthrough, which makes it quite different than the previous 2 standards, which were more of an introduction to the process itself. Before we go into the ANSI standard, I wanted to just mention an update on the ISO standards project. And I encourage you, if you haven't done so before, to go online and do a Google search for ISO TC260. Since we did the last webinar, 5 more countries have joined the ISO TC260 project. And those include the Barbados, Denmark, Kenya, Russia, and Turkey. So that's a very significant addition, especially with BRIC countries starting to move into this project, and it's very exciting for the standards project globally. As I've done previously, just very quickly about myself, Canadian national, 15 years working in global HR, education and business, finance, industrial relations and HR, and I've been involved with this standards project since 2009. Very important to mention that as this presentation goes through, especially because we're going to be paralleling the standard quite closely, that it still remains a presentation from myself. There's elements of opinion that will come into play. It's just my opinion. There are hundreds of people working on this project, dozens of people on the ISO standards project. SHRM has 250,000+ members worldwide. The purpose of this webinar is to advance the discussion on human resource standards. The reason this standard came about, or this particular webinar came about, was because in the discussion with people, the number one question I've asked people who've been very hesitant to even engage in a discussion is, have they actually read an HR standard? We want to give people absolutely no excuse for not having at least gone through a standard before they draw conclusions about the standards project. I encourage you, and I know for those of you that are watching live right now, to download a copy of the standard. It's currently available from SHRM at the shrm.org website under the domains HR Standards, Documents, Performance Management. I encourage you to download a copy of it, read along as we're going through this to get a better comprehensive understanding of the standard overall. This is the cover of the standard, the Performance Management Standard from ANSI and SHRM. It has 37 pages, 1,198 lines, 8,569 words. The point being is we want to critique whether or not this standard is intimidating, useful, necessary. I would encourage you to decide. So let's go through the standard itself. The essentials of the standard are contained in 4 sections of the standard itself. There's an overview of performance management, section 5, goal setting, performance review standard, and performance improvement plans in sections 6, 7, and 8. That is the key area of the standard itself. I encourage you, as we're going through this, and I'll have slides that ask you to reflect upon the standard elements, to ask yourself, are the elements of the standard more or less than your current performance management practices? And be honest with yourself. Are the elements in the standard too nation specific, too culture specific, too industry specific? And I would suggest the most important question is, would implementing this standard in your organization be helpful and add credibility to the outcomes of your HR function? The method of this presentation isn't what we've been doing so far. I'm going to walk through the standard step by step in its natural or chronological order. I will make some modest emphasis in certain areas, but in general, what will happen is more like an audiobook, a slightly abridged audiobook. The weakness of this format is some of these slides that are coming are very busy. They have too much written content. But it's not meant to be a typical PowerPoint presentation. It's meant to be, as I said, more like an audiobook. You can always stop it and read it online if that's available to you. Or if you have a copy, go parallel through the copy. This becomes the audio version for you. The goal, as I mentioned, is to give people one less excuse for not making the effort to become more familiar with an actual HR standard and the HR standards development project. Currently there's 39 nations that are involved in the ISO standards project, and with roughly 200 or so nations globally, clearly there's a strong momentum for this project that's not going away. Finally, before we enter the standard itself, this presentation is for educational purposes only. This is not a substitute for direct reference to the standard itself. As you could imagine, the source of the standard is the standard is the source. Let's go. This is the second page of the standard itself, Performance Management Standard, approved on November 30th, 2012, in consultation between ANSI and SHRM. The first content that you're going to come across is the notice and disclaimer, and it mentions the fact that the standard is developed by consensus, but consensus does not necessarily mean that there's unanimity. And this is a voluntary consensus. As it relates to SHRM's role, SHRM is the administrator of the process of development. SHRM does not write the document, it does not test or evaluate or verify the accuracy or completeness. SHRM is a non-profit member association, is not a regulator, and is not a licensor. SHRM has no authority to monitor and enforce compliance, nor does it have any desire to. SHRM publishes this content to be used as voluntary guidelines. In essence, it's the user's choice. The content does not represent SHRM advice. SHRM is the copyright holder to the standard. The foreword in the standard. All of the content prior to entering contents is not part of the standards. Example, what we're talking about right now. Of note, ANSI uses two descriptors to categorize a standard requirement. One is mandatory, one is recommended, and the words usually used will be shall or must or should or may. And they have very different meanings. Having both mandatory and recommended elements are the preferred method to outline an element of a standard. The abstract or general introduction to the standard, this performance management standard is based upon the cause and effect relationship between managing employees' performance and an organization's success. In this standard, there are three core elements of performance management: goal setting, performance reviews, and performance improvement plans. This standard is written at as they say, a high level, a more abstract level, rather than getting into specifics. Nevertheless, there will be some specifics outlined. The task force members, if you have a copy of the actual standard, you'll see quite a mix of people, a mix of practitioners, academics, consultants, and specialists. Some of the members are based in the US and US citizens, but also many of the members are based outside of the US and of other nationalities. Those listed in the standard are the ones who were directly involved or active upon approval of the standard itself. Many more people were involved in the course of development of this standard from the beginning, and participation from start to finish of the development of a standard requires a significant amount of stamina and conviction. Contents. You'll notice on the top right-hand corner I've listed 1 of 37. So now we're entering sort of the core content of the standard itself. As you see listed here, there are 10 sections in the standard. I'm not going to read through each one of these. We're going to go through most of these. And as I mentioned earlier, sections 5, 6, and 7, 5, 6, 7, and 8 are the core. If you're really looking to get to the essence of the standard, start with section 5. Section 1, scope, purpose, and application. The interpretation of the scope. The scope acknowledges that there is more to the performance management process than is listed in the standard. The purpose of this standard is to take the three elements, that is goal setting, performance review, and performance improvement plans, into a systematic context. That is to identify the elements that are minimum required to be effective. Again, worth emphasizing, to identify the elements that are the minimum required to be effective. The application of this standard guides organizations seeking to build, redesign, update, or evaluate their performance management systems. Interpretation of the standards, we encourage feedback. Any suggestions, questions regarding the interpretation of this should be referred to the email address hrstandards@shrm.org, or very specifically hrstds@shrm.org. Normative references. Any references used in the standard are up to date at the time that it was published. All standards are subject to revision. Very important point. All standards are subject to revision and will inevitably be revised. There are some lists of references. There's a few more listed in the actual standard itself. These are useful resources, but they're not required to comply with the standard. The executive summary. Effective performance management is critical to an organization's success. Despite its importance, performance management is difficult and hard to sustain. There are three elements that, at a minimum, should be included in a performance management system. Those three elements are goal setting, performance reviews, and performance improvement plans. More specifically, goal setting is the process of establishing objectives to be achieved over a period of time. Performance reviews is the process of assessing progress towards goals. And performance improvement plans, that is the process of addressing a specific individual performance issue. Executive summary. Effective performance management seeking value creation requires engaging, that is, encouraging and motivating an employee's full potential. Effective means not wasting resources. Effective performance management facilitates communicating critical information, including expectations, ongoing feedback or coaching, regular performance feedback, and addressing performance issues if necessary. Successful performance management is a shared management responsibility, not just an HR task. For those of you who deal with performance management, this is articulated in an ANSI SHRM standard. It is not just an HR task. This performance management standard is written to allow the broadest possible application. It focuses on the individual in terms of performance management, but the same principles can apply to teams. This standard is a guideline. Effective performance management systems are dynamic and need to be flexible to fit the uniqueness of each organization. The standard itself says that. The glossary. I'm not going to go through each one of these listed items, but for some of the terms listed that may require some additional definitions, if you have a copy of the standard, you will find these concepts listed as well as their definitions, and including acronyms and abbreviations, CBA, IDP, PIP, SHRM, SMART, for example. Section 5. So here we enter the core essence of the standard itself. The definition of performance management is a system of maintaining or improving job performance of employees through the use of planning, coaching, mentoring, and providing continuous feedback. A manager or supervisor who conducts the review is the employee's coach. Here you see we've introduced a definitional term that a manager or supervisor is in essence the employee's coach. Duties, competencies, and accomplishments must be reviewed at least annually and include goals, career development, and growth. That is definitional aspect of performance management. Not all organizations use a formal performance review process, for example, unions. However, done fairly and with balance, performance reviews can help engage employees and increase personal responsibility in any work environment. Leaders need to be aware of the generational issues and adjust their performance review processes based upon the values of different generations. The latter also demonstrates HR as a profession is capable of changing with the times. Again, these aren't a journalistic article. These are the terms and conditions outlined in the performance management standard. Performance management as a system. One key reason HR is different or has evolved from personnel is because of its emphasis on performance management. Routines of examining performance become a process when current outcomes are remeasured and compared with the goals and measures previously set. But a process evolves to become a system when the outcomes of one cycle become the primary input to the next cycle. It is the importance given to feedback and the formal creation of a feedback loop that connects performance management to systems theory. The most comprehensive application of a dynamic performance management system occurs when the cause and effect connections of current performance are used to define and align future performance. Goal setting and performance improvement plans are two key elements that can achieve the latter goal. This performance management standard does not recommend a specific product to use. Rather, it outlines the elements that should be included in any performance management system, acknowledging that actual documents and planning methods used may be non-conventional, especially now with technologies that are coming available or that we're not yet aware of. However, the three key elements of this standard should be contained with any system used. Unions or work councils. The intention of the standard is to have universal application. However, legally, in certain work environments, example unions or work councils, this may not be possible. Nevertheless, the developers of the standard strongly believe the essence and intention is mutually beneficial in all workplaces, and if not incorporated, the elements herein should be considered in future negotiations or agreements. At a minimum, in terms of fairness and equity, the performance management process must be fairly and consistently administered without regard to non-work related issues. Demographic grouping should be analyzed to identify unintended or systematic biases. Role of the manager and the employee, we're on section 5.5 now. Regular, formal, and constructive communication is the central mission of the performance review process. To achieve this mission, both the employee and the person conducting their review should be equally informed and aware in advance of the following: the steps in the process, how the process works, why employee performance is evaluated, and what the expectations are after the review meeting. In terms of goal setting, we're being very specific now to the manager's role. For the manager, for goal setting, the manager's responsibility include communicating management's expectations and goals to the employee. For goal setting, the manager's role is to collaborate to develop subsequent goals that are aligned with the organization's goals. In terms of the performance review process, the manager's role is to ensure the review is fair, objective, and consistent with the organization's policies and procedures. As a matter of best practice, and this is the first time we've introduced that phrase here, in other words, what organizations should do, not necessarily what they must do. As a matter of best practice, a manager should manage the ratio of communication. That is, stay on topic, be specific to the specific employee and their specific work issues. The manager should document both successful and unsuccessful examples of performance. The manager should provide continuous feedback, not just during the review. And the manager should, in order to be maximally effective, performance management is not a once-a-year activity. It is a continuous dialogue between management and employees, a very, very important point in terms of the manager's role. The manager's responsibility is to document, and the documentation must, here we use the word must, be accessible to employees and aligned with the organization with clear examples given. The delivery of the message itself is designed to teach, direct, and praise employees in terms of expectations fully understood. And any disagreements should be documented, and the manager signs and dates. In terms of a performance improvement plan, the clear outline of the expectations need to be clearly outlined and monitored, and the administration of the PIP must be done must progress fairly. In terms of the employee's role, for goal setting, The employee's responsibility is to participate in order to develop SMART goals, and the employee should commit to in good faith. In terms of the performance review, the employee's role is to participate constructively and actively. Be aware and respectful of the manager's duty and authority to administer the performance review. The employee should complete a self-evaluation if it is part of the organization's performance management process. The employee's role is to listen. The employee's role is to incorporate observations, feedback, and goals outlined into their future performance. The employee's role is to ask questions and seek clarification if and when necessary. The employee's role is to formally document any unresolved issues using the proper format. The employee's role is to sign and date, acknowledging receipt of the review, not necessarily agreement of the review. And for a performance improvement plan, the employee's role is to commit to the plan steps and be honest with management. Ending section 5, the overview of performance management. A few questions for you to consider. Are the elements we've just talked about, is your organization doing more or less than what's outlined? Are the elements listed too nation specific? Are they too culture specific? Are they too industry specific? And perhaps most important, would the implementation of this standard be helpful to you and your organization and add credibility to your HR outcomes? Section 6, goal setting. First, we talk about the scope. This standard describes the minimum effective standards for performance goal setting based upon job duties, work projects, and desired behaviors. This standard does not address competencies. Again, this standard does not address competencies in goal setting. The standard is intended to apply to individuals and teams' performance in large or small organizations within unions or in non-union environments. The standard also includes a timeline for goal setting and the goal setting process, as well as documentation and review and adjustments of previously set goals. The types of goals. Here we are outlining the various types of goals in the standard. The first one is job description goals, based upon a pre-established set of job duties. Examples of job description goals include financial, customer, process, or system goals. And in terms of the job description, accomplished continuously or until the job description changes. Project goals. Achievement of a project objective, often by year or project completion. Job description plus project goals equals what needs to be accomplished. Behavioral goals. How things need to be accomplished based upon behaviors. Expectations, accomplished continuously. Stretch goals. These are especially challenging goals outside the comfort zone, often linked to learning objectives for high potential employees. Rating scale. Most performance management processes do use a rating scale to indicate different levels of performance. All effective performance management processes should incorporate some kind of measurement. An example would be a Likert scale. 6.3, the elements of effective goals. There are 10 elements that are listed here as a matter of guidance. One is that the goals should be participative, they should be documented, they should be specific, they should be measurable, they should be challenging but attainable, reasonable, timely, flexible, monitored, and flow from the top down. Included in the standard is an example of a poor goal, reduced turnover. A more effective goal for the same desired outcome would be stated: reduce voluntary turnover of a business analyst in the marketing department from 25% to 20% by June 11th, 2011. A much more effective definition of a goal. Documentation. Goals should be documented in writing in the employee's personnel file and a copy given to the employee. In terms of documentation, the same document and information should be used to cross-reference the previous period's goals and feedback with the development of new goals and current feedback. Review and adjusting goals. Goals should be revisited and as changes occur in the business, whereby realignment may also be required. A process should be established to allow the employee and their manager to comment and update progress towards goals on a regular basis, but no less frequently than quarterly. Very important point. ending the section on goal setting. Again, are the elements outlined in goal setting more or less than your current performance management practices? Are they too nation specific? Are they too cultural specific? Are they too industry specific? And would implementing this standard be helpful to you and your organization and the credibility of your HR function? Section 7, Performance Review Standard. The scope of this. This standard describes the minimum effective standard for performance reviews. The standard is not specific to any one business entity, industry, employee group, or corporate policy. The standard also includes an overview of performance evaluation considerations, the review process, feedback, as well as performance review training, internal controls, and calibration. 7.2, Performance Evaluations. Definition. Performance evaluation involves objective and subjective considerations of how to measure and evaluate employee performance results. Objective indicators of performance include, but are not limited to, dollar volume of sales, profitability, product volume. Subjective indicators include, but are not limited to, employee accomplishments, impact assessment of those accomplishments. Performance evaluation. Typically, the evaluation information is used to examine the need for improvement or performance being satisfactory or employee is ready for promotion. A measurement scale may be used to capture this information. An example of a numeric scale may include 5 to 7 point rating systems. An example of a descriptive scale may include words or expressions like does not meet, meets, or exceeds expectations. The scale itself should be able to clearly differentiate performance. Very important point. Success factors to assess include knowledge, skills, ability, and other characteristics. The supervisor manager's ongoing assessment of objective and subjective performance, informal and informal feedback are important parts of the performance evaluation process. 7.3, Performance Review Process. The actual performance review process will vary from organization to organization, but the elements of that process are universal. That is, the process should be seen to be separate from its tools. The tools may vary, but the process has commonality. The minimum effective elements of this standard shall include a feedback process that is continuous, dialogue comparing actual outcomes versus preset goals, outcome acknowledgement that is documented, two-way conversation, preferably face-to-face, at least once a year. Feedback. Feedback is essential at all stages of the performance review process. Behaviors and results, that is expectations, should be set during the planning process and discussed throughout the review period. In addition to feedback that recognizes extremes, day-to-day feedback should be given. Feedback effectiveness requires two-way communication, a responsibility of both the manager and the employee. Effective feedback should be timely, constructive, specific, and balanced. That is, include positive and developmental information. Feedback must be based on actual behaviors, not personal characteristics that affect performance. 7.5, Performance Review Training. Performance review training for performance review participants is strongly recommended. At a minimum, to be effective, both the manager and the employee should be provided with information outlining process steps, timelines, expected outcomes at each stage, and specific follow-up responsibilities. Performance review role-playing, facilitated by HR, is considered a best practice. Though not required, in situations or jurisdictions with risk management concerns, a qualified HR person should be present during the actual review. In such cases, the performance review should not be considered valid unless the qualified HR member is present during the review. The latter doubles as on-the-job training for managers conducting performance reviews. 7.6.1, Measurement and Control. Performance management measures and KPIs are indicators of an organization's efficiency and effectiveness. Efficiency-related performance management measures, such as percent of employees receiving their performance management reviews on time, can be further segmented by percent of protected classes receiving their performance management reviews on time, or percent of key performance key performers receiving their performance management reviews on time. Additional efficiency measures include % of managers who complete their performance reviews properly and on time, cycle time, that is, the duration of time spent by the organization conducting performance reviews, and total cost of the performance management system. Performance management internal controls, effectiveness measures include, these are examples, % of performance reviews with clear goals and are effectively written, % of managers satisfied with the performance review process, % of employees satisfied with the performance review process, % of top or key performers satisfied with the performance review process, the % of employees that improve their performance or productivity after their first review, % increase in organizational performance after performance review cycles, impact of performance review in helping the organization defend against charges of discrimination, compensation inequity, and/or wrongful termination. And last on this list, impact of performance reviews on the achievement of organizational objectives. Performance management internal controls include comparison of performance management review completed against the roster of current employees, a review of employee files to ensure the presence of properly completed and employee acknowledged performance reviews, compliance level assessment with organizational policies, laws, and regulations, a survey of current employees regarding their satisfaction with the integrity of the performance management process, the decisions resulting from individual performance reviews. Clear standards rating scales. Clear definitions of each level of performance must be provided. Examples of behaviors, skills, measures, etc. that will assist a rater in making decisions should be provided. 7.8, calibration. Calibration, the method of reviewing the distribution of ratings to ensure consistency and fairness throughout an organization. Consistency between raters and departments is a key performance management goal. Use of clear definitions of each level of performance, including examples, should be used, especially when that performance is linked to numbers. Consistency amongst the management team is a key to consistency throughout the organization. Use of a final that is single score should be used and is useful in pay for performance and needs analysis. This is end of section 7. Again, is this more or less than your current performance practices? Is it too nation specific, too culture or industry specific? And would implementing this standard be helpful to you and your organization and add credibility to your HR function? Section 8, performance improvement plans. Definition. A performance improvement plan is a process used to resolve persistent performance problems in accordance with a documented procedure. Elements of a performance improvement plan include current and expected performance, timelines, measures based upon whether sufficient improvement was achieved, a means for open dialogue and consistent feedback, and designed to allow employee the opportunity to succeed. This standard includes appropriate uses and outcomes of a performance improvement plan in Section 8.2, guidelines for the feedback conversation in Section 8.3, and guidelines for documentation, Section 8.4, 8.5. 8.2, appropriate uses, application range of a performance improvement plan from new employee to unclear or chronic. If a collective bargaining agreement is used, defer to the terms and conditions of a collective bargaining agreement. Possible performance improvement plan outcomes include return to acceptable level of performance, extension of a timeline, job reassignment, or termination of employment. Performance improvement feedback conversation, refer to Section 7.4 for guidelines on delivering employee feedback. 8.4, document support. Documentation within the organization should support the use of performance improvement plans. This includes the following documents: job descriptions, performance management processes, manager guidelines, and HR policies. Document format guidelines. Documentation is a critical tool for facilitating performance discussions. Formats will vary, but should, at a minimum, include the following details: employee info, key dates, performance gaps and their details, expectations, actual performance, consequences, action plan, signatures, and evaluation of the action plan. You'll note that Section 10 of the standard contains some more details related to each one of these items. Documentation format guidelines, 2 essential dates that must be included. One is the date of the performance improvement plan, when it was initiated, and 2 is the duration of the performance improvement plan. The performance improvement plan should include the dates or frequency of progress reviews, example, once a day or once a week, etc. Performance improvement plan should identify specific facts about performance, not hearsay, not opinions, and not generalizations or vagueness. That should include a statement regarding expectations of sustained and/or consistent performance and is useful for coaching and verification. And the performance improvement plan should include wording stating that termination may occur with or without an employee signature, provided the PIP is part of a progressive discipline process that leads to termination. End of performance improvement plan overview. Again, is this more or less than what your current organization does? Is it too nation, culture, or industry specific? And would implementing what we've just discussed, this standard, be helpful to you and your organization and add credibility to the HR function? Section 9, connection to other performance management processes. Aside from the 3 processes or elements outlined in the standard, effective performance management systems may be linked to the following processes: strategic planning, that is, or example would be greater emphasis on the quality of the workforce; total compensation, example, link to pay for performance systems; individual and team development regarding things like career and promotion; succession planning, where performance management data and trends are crucial; and HR technologies. These can be helpful to manage the performance improvement process. Basically, Section 9 is a list of the elements that the current standard development task force suggests for future revision to this particular standard. Section 10, additional recommendations. The information contained thus far in this standard document outlines the minimum effective guidelines for performance management processes. But the most successful organizations often do much more than what is the minimum. What follows, that is in Section 10, is some of the more innovative and/or successful approaches to performance management. Best practices regarding goal setting. Specific to goal setting, managers need to know the goal set for their employees and be flexible based upon receiving new information. Goal setting information should be communicated well in advance of any meeting related to such. Some organizations use feedback sources other than the direct manager, usually as supplemental notes. Appropriate uses of a performance improvement plan. Although milestones may vary, performance improvement plans usually follow a 3-step context: informal, formal, and final, brackets, warning. The term warning should not be included in a PIP until the final step. Lack of a formal progressive discipline policy does not eliminate an employee's recourse for poorly administered discipline. The consequences should increase in a progressive performance improvement plan, and the consequences of a final warning need to be clearly outlined as either termination or transfer. Documentation, job descriptions regarding the performance improvement plan. Performance standards should be cross-referenced using a job description. Consideration should be made of the business cycle and seasonality. Performance management process should be documented and provided to employee, including the frequency, the performance standards, reviews, and link to compensation and/or merit. Human resource policies may be stored in many different forms of media, but should be available via written media and include the steps of a discipline process. In terms of guidelines, Apologies for that, folks. Iyad, can you go back to the
Yes,
page?
sure.
2 pages. One more? Okay, thank you. Just a few more pages, folks. The documentation format of the PIP. The PIP includes documentation and conversations. Documentation is critical for success in the process. The PIP documentation guideline, the format should include employee information, key dates, performance gap details, expectations, actual performance, consequences, action plans, signatures, evaluation of the action plan. We have covered almost the majority of information in this standard. There is a note section at the back of the standard. This is the last page of the standard. This is the final cover. Again, I ask you one last time, what was outlined in this ANSI SHRM Performance Management Standard, is this something that your organization is doing currently, more or less? Is the standard to nation, culture, or industry specific? Would implementing this standard be helpful to you? And I want to introduce a last question here. If standards are basic, some would say too basic, how many organizations can honestly say they are currently meeting or exceeding the basics of performance management as is outlined in this particular standard? Closing thoughts. Do more, do better, but don't do less and call it HR. Because we, HR, we have standards. That is the end of part 3. As previously, questions, you have my email. You're welcome to send me any questions that you may have, and I'll be happy to take online questions at this time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brad. Dino, that's really impressive. You know, about 40 pages of standard, you were able to summarize them in less than 50 minutes. You know, that's a lot of information to cover. So thank you very much, Dino, for putting them all together. So now you will save a lot of time for people to go and, you know, go over and read